Hello and welcome to a special Spectator event, Smart Money, How to Use Less Energy and Save on Your Bills. I'm Kate Andrews, the Spectator's economics editor, and your host for the next 45 minutes. Today's virtual event is kindly sponsored by Smart Energy GB. When bills rocketed last year, the fragility of Britain's energy security was exposed. A year on, we have a new Department for Energy Security and a pledge from the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps, to have the lowest energy bills in Europe. But how are we going to achieve this? Managing demand is going to factor in too. So how can consumers take control of their energy usage and save money in the process? What does this future look like? And how would that reduce Britain's reliance on imported energy? Well, to answer all of these questions and more, I'm joined by three experts. We have Charles Hendry, who is the president of the British Institute of Energy Economics. He was formerly a Conservative MP and for 2 years the Minister of State for Climate Change, responsible for the smart meter rollout. Sara Higham is the Director of Corporate Affairs at Smart Energy GB and oversees the organization's relationship with industry and government. And David Shipworth is a professor of energy and the built environment at University College London. His research focuses on demand flexibility in the energy system. So let's get into it, but right before I start with my questions, I want to encourage you to submit yours. We've already had some pre-submitted questions for today's event, but you can ask questions live. There's a text box just below the video where you can submit your question. That comes straight to the Spectator team, and I'll be getting to those in about 20-25 minutes, although I'm going to start with a few of my own. So Charles, I'm going to come to you first. Everyone has heard now about the need to secure Britain's energy supply. To what extent is this really feasible, especially in the short term?
It's absolutely feasible, although I think it may be medium term rather than short term, because that the way many of the mechanisms which need to be put in place to guarantee our security take some years to put in place. If we wanted more gas storage, then that's 5 years. If we want a new interconnector, that's 3-5 years. So that some of the big projects and new plants is going to take some considerable time to get in place. Kat, I'm getting a lot of feedback on here. I'm sort of hearing myself speaking, which is not ideal. So that can be cut out. But I think when it comes to the theme of today's discussion, the smart meter rollout is absolutely fundamental to changing consumer behavior and giving consumers new opportunities. If we want people in their homes and their businesses to be part of the solution here, where they can decide when they're going to generate electricity, when they're going to store it, when they're going to use it, when they're going to sell it back to the grid, then that is only possible if we've got smart meters installed in our homes and our businesses. So this is the fundamental building block of creating a much more flexible and a much more exciting system. It moves consumers from being the passive recipients of what their energy companies throw at them to being the people who decide how they're going to run their homes. So it's a really exciting change, but it also means we're going to have a much more secure system. We're going to have a huge amount more flexibility, and it's going to help in decarbonisation. It's win-win-win, and it ticks the big box for affordability as well.
Sara, how does household energy consumption affect national energy security?
So as Charles rightly said, and I couldn't have introduced it better myself, when we're thinking about our energy security, it's about balancing supply with demand, or in the future, demand with supply, and that's where flexibility of the system comes into it. We recently published a report with Cornwall Insight, which looked at the way in which all consumers in their homes can impact energy security in the short, medium and long term. In the short term, it's about reducing energy where they can, or in fact using it more smartly, if you like, rather than using less, because I think the way in which you can change energy use is deeply personal to each person and what their household looks like. And they can do that really well with a smart meter because of the information that gives you that empowers them to make those choices. And then thinking about the medium and the long term, as we see more time of use tariffs come onto the market, which is a tariff that allows you to be potentially paid for using less energy, or in fact, in some cases, using more at different times of the day, then you'll see even greater contribution from individual households to our energy security. I think it's important that we remember that households in the UK use about 1/3 of all gas and 1/3 of all electricity that the UK consumes in a year. And so, our cumulative impact on energy security from the demand side is significant.
Mm. And Charles, just to set the framework here a little bit more, how secure is Britain's energy supply right now? I mean, last year you had the government warning about blackouts. Thankfully, that was largely avoided. And of course, last year was a very unique year when it came to energy concerns. But have we made progress over this past year? I mean, where are we right now when it comes to our own security?
I think we've come through this winter in a way that nobody really would have anticipated being possible just a few months ago. And now, to some extent, we were helped by the weather conditions. Part of the winter was milder. It meant that gas storage remained at much higher levels than people would have anticipated. It means we come out of the winter with a lot of gas in storage, which is very unusual. And that is really good for next winter, because already people had been starting to get anxious about that. But I think what we've also seen is how we can then start to change the system. And exactly as Sara was saying, people have been given the opportunity to say, look, I will cut my use during a period of a few hours, because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about days of challenge. We're talking about a few hours on a few days. And we can shade the demand. Consumers can do that. Businesses can do that. And Elon Musk was saying this week, he said, look, if we actually go down this route of more energy storage, better managed systems, then rather than energy and electricity use doubling or trebling over the next 30 years, we could actually find that we can reduce it overall. So this is a key part of delivering our energy security. I think what the government is doing and its focus on addressing these issues is really important. Some of those measures are relatively quick. Others will take more time. But I think we had a big wake-up call February of last year. We recognized we had allowed Europe to become far too over-reliant on a single source of supply. And we've now got to take energy security every bit as seriously as we take affordability and decarbonization.
David, how far do you think smart meters will actually help to improve energy security? And is managing the demand side really more effective than managing the supply side?
It's not a matter of either or. It's always going to be a matter of basically using the demand increasingly to align with our supply side. So this is both the sort of opportunity and challenge of having more and more intermittent renewables on our system, is that we want to try and get demand to a certain extent to match the availability of supply. And that's where the demand side becomes really deeply entwined with the supply side to make a system which balances out over the course of the day, the week and the year. So we're really trying to kind of focus on how we get that balancing right. And that's where smart meters are an absolutely integral solution. So I also do quite a bit of work under the auspices of the International Energy Agency, and every other country in the world is recognizing and rolling out smart meters as a kind of enabling technology. They're a bit like the equivalent of our kind of smartphones for the energy system. We really need to be able to understand when people are using energy. We need to create value for them to shift that load out of the peak times, because especially for homes create the peaks in the mornings and the evenings, and that's the thing that we need to kind of shift around. So yeah, essential piece of technology, and they really can create value for householders when you combine them with other bits of technology that use energy in the home.
Of course, Sara, some consumers understandably get concerned when we start talking about changes to the demand on energy, especially already in a cost of living crisis where people are scaling back. Any talk of not using energy over certain periods of time might make people a bit nervous. Do you think there is a way we can improve Britain's energy security without talking about demand flexibility, or is this going to be a crucial factor?
We know that flexibility in the system is going to be a huge part of energy security. I think the government says that it'll save about £10 billion if you have flexibility, not just consumer flexibility, but sort of broader flexibility assets on the system. But what I would say is, it's an understandable question that people will have, particularly in a cost of living crisis. How do I try and contribute to this? How can I try and save money in a way that's not going to impact my life negatively? And that's why I said earlier that actually the way in which you can get engaged with this conversation is incredibly personal to you, your family and your household. And an awful lot of the tips, the changes in the short term, so ways in which you can sort of make changes now in the home, are about using energy in a smarter, more cost-effective way and cutting waste rather than cutting your necessary energy usage. So, for example, one of the tips that we've been working with the Energy Saving Trust to promote is shower time. If you normally have an 8-minute shower and you cut it down to 4 minutes, you can be saving, I think they said in the quantity of about £95 a year, for example. One of the things that I've done in my home when I moved in, my previous owners, for whatever reason, had put an awful lot of spotlights in, and they were all halogen. And the moment I got my smart meter, I could see that it went into the red when I turned those lights on. So immediately I went and got some LED light bulbs for all of those spotlights, and that saved, I think they, in the quantity of about £100 a year as well. So there are these changes that you can make to reduce waste that don't affect the quality of your life. And actually some of the other changes you could be making and the things that we've been talking about this winter will improve people's lives and the comfort of their homes. So old chimneys that are incredibly drafty, you can put these balloons in there to stop the draft coming down, and that'll help you feel much more comfortable. So it's about it's how we frame the conversation. It's not about using less, it's about using the energy that we need to use in a smart way that suits you and your lifestyle. And in the longer term, when it comes to some of these more flexibility conversations, there will be a time, I think government says by mid-2035, when flexibility in the home will be incredibly integrated. People will have hopefully the technology to allow them to do it in a way that doesn't impact on their lifestyle. So, boilers that are incredibly, water tanks that are incredibly energy efficient, so you can store water for longer and heat it outside of peak times, etc. So we're only on the start of this journey, but there's so much more to do. And yes, it's really important that we make sure we're having a conversation about what's comfortable and what's smart energy usage, not using less.
Of course, Charles, if you look at the story of carbon emissions in the UK, it is not the case that you have to choose necessarily between rising living standards and improving environmental quality. Carbon emissions have collapsed since their height in the 1970s, and I'm looking at the per capita figures here, back down to the Victorian era. So it isn't necessarily going to be the case that consumers are going to have to choose between higher living standards and making choices around, say, technology like smart meters. But that case really does have to be made and explained to people.
Oh, I think so. But I think we can also say, look, we've done it. Look at what we've achieved. And I think if you go back over the last 30 years, the economy has grown by 70+%, and we've cut emissions by 40+%. So it's exactly the point which you're making there. But I think one of the issues which we haven't addressed sufficiently seriously over the past has been energy efficiency. And that picks up on what some of Sara was saying. The most effective way of helping the energy crisis is by making sure our homes and our businesses are more energy efficient. Now, the government is putting more money into this, but actually, I think we do really need to have a step change in the way in which we're going about this, because otherwise that the measures which people can take in their homes will be offset by the fact they're simply going to be too cold. And so that we need, first of all, to have this much more rigorous approach to ensuring all homes are energy efficient.
David, can you tell us a bit about the pattern of Britain's energy usage and exactly how much strain is on the grid when it's at its peak?
Well, this is a really important point, I think, because we're seeing, as I was saying, that households introduce the kind of peak loads in the morning and the evening. A lot of our other loads are a lot flatter. And one of the challenges we're going to face as we progressively decarbonize, and just picking up on Charles' point, that the cheapest way now to generate energy is through solar and wind. So we're on declining cost curves. Really, almost every country is heading down this road of decarbonizing. So what we need to do is to make that possible so we can get the benefits of that, both in terms of securing our own energy supply, but also in terms of having cheaper energy. But to do that, we really are going to come up against a constraint of how much power, particularly electricity, we can pump through our networks. And they take a while to upgrade. So in order to make that work, we need to use our networks as efficiently as possible. And that really means trying to flatten out when we use energy. So from that side of it, when we think about things like heat pumps and electric vehicles, which are really efficient technologies. They're much more efficient ways of heating homes and moving people around than the conventional fossil fuel technologies. But we need to be able to shift those loads so that you're recharging your electric vehicle overnight and your heat pump is, coming on earlier in the morning and then maybe not running at kind of the peak morning or evening times. If we can do that, we really help shift our capacity to use our renewables that we've got, which are the best way to achieve energy security. And households are central to that kind of flattening out of the load, and we need smart metering to help us understand that and to shift those loads around.
And in terms of understanding, Sara, can you just give us a short explanation on how demand flexibility service would work or does work?
Sure. So there's the two different sort of options, if you like, at the moment. So one is the winter demand service that was run by National Grid ESO. So that was a service where they worked with energy suppliers and other third-party contractors who essentially then got their consumers, their customers to sign up to a plan, which meant that after having a baseline taken from their energy usage using their smart meter. So the energy supplier basically knows how much that person normally uses between 4 and 6 on a weekday, for example. They are then paid money back when the winter demand service is ticked on by National Grid ESO. It says we're getting a bit tight in the system between 4 and 6 tomorrow. Can you ask your customers to turn down? They will then get a message, an email, a text message, however their supplier was running it, to say, between those hours, if you can turn down. And if they can demonstrate that they've turned down, and it's the smart meter recording your half-hourly data usage that is the thing that allows them to see that you've done that, then you can get money back. The other one is a time of use tariff. Now, there are some time of use tariffs in the market at the moment, fewer than there were because of the energy crisis, but they can work in different ways. So some of them are agile tariffs. So one of the suppliers currently has an agile tariff in the market, and that essentially means that a day ahead, that customer will be told it's going to be cheaper or more expensive during these periods, so turn up or turn down accordingly. And then the other ones are sort of static time of use tariffs, which is mostly what one of the EV ones would look like, which essentially says if you can charge your vehicle overnight when electricity is cheaper because there's more abundancy of wind, etc., and there's fewer people using it, then it'll be cheaper for you to do that. And it becomes much more cost effective for you as an EV owner to charge. And it means we all benefit because the system becomes less peaky. So they're the two ways that you can do it at the moment, but it's only the start of the process. So we're going to see some big system changes coming in from 2025 called half-hourly settlement. I won't go into the detail of what that actually means, but what it means for the consumer is all of our energy suppliers are going to be incentivized to offer us more of these products. And what they look like, we don't yet know, because it'll be a commercial offer. And it'll be down to individual suppliers to see what works for them and works for their customers. And I think this winter period and the winter demand service would have really informed all of us in terms of the appetite of consumers to get involved. And the early signs are there's absolutely appetite there.
I just want to remind our viewers that you can submit a question live. There's a text box just below the video, and if you send your question over to the Spectator team, that will be funneled directly to me. And I want to get to those questions soon, but before we do, I want to move into an area that I think puts quite a few consumers off the idea of smart meters, and that is privacy concern. Sara, people were told that their energy use data wouldn't be used, that it would be kept private. But the government did take it and use it to design the energy price guarantee rollout last year. And now they're saying, Sara, that they're going to hold it for 7 years for quite vague additional purposes. How do you answer concerns about privacy?
In terms of the EPG and what information was taken, obviously that's probably, that's a conversation to have with DESNZ. What I can do is reassure everyone who's listening to this that your smart meter does not record or hold any personal information about you. So it doesn't know your name, it doesn't know, your bank details, anything like that. What it does have is how much energy you've used in half-hourly periods, if that's what you've opted in for, and that's only shared with you and your supplier unless you've given consent for that process. And so I think the EPG may have been one of those processes in which they've done that. But it is your information, and there's nothing personal on the meter at all. And the other sort of thing to remember as well is that smart meters aren't using the internet. So it's its own separate service that was designed with the cybersecurity people at GCHQ to make sure that it is incredibly robust, which makes sure that from a hacking perspective, that's not an issue either. So it's well away from the internet, it's private, it's doing its own thing. And in fact, the people who run the network can't even see your energy usage data. It's you and it's your supplier, unless you give explicit consent otherwise. The other thing I would just add whilst I'm on this point is that this bit about giving consent for your energy usage in the future, in order to take part in some of these fantastic things where you could get paid to be turning off at different times, etc., or to get more granular information so that you can understand what you might be able to do more in the home to save even more money. That's the sort of time when you might give permission to a third party via an app or whatever in order to do that. But you would be making that choice, and it would be voluntary for you to enter into that.
Okay, can I add to that as well? Because one of the changes I made when we came into government back in 2010 was to move this much more towards an opt-in system, because up until that point, the energy companies had the right to break into people's home to install a smart meter. They hadn't used the power, but the power was there. And I thought that that would be the most effective way of turning people off this. And they needed to be able to opt in. I also thought that the case being made for smart meters shouldn't be done by government, shouldn't be done by industry, but really it should be done by communities and neighborhoods, and where people were saying, look, this is how much I'm saving. This is the improvement it's made in my life. And therefore to make it reassuring to the consumer that this was not something which government was imposing. It was something they could opt into when they chose to do so. But also, if they want to get the benefits, you can only get those benefits if the technology is there, and that means having a smart meter. And so it was trying to get the right balance between moving forward the rollout, but at the same time reassuring people about privacy, about the pace of the rollout, and whether they needed to have one at all.
Well, let me ask you, Charles, when the news that this data had been used to design the energy price guarantee came out, Labour's shadow energy minister, Alan Whitehead, called it an outrageous piece of private data plundering. Would you agree with those comments?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, I think the urgency of trying to get something in place that helped consumers was so enormous. That's what we were all focused on last year. How do we actually help consumers come through this crisis? And the government could only frame that correctly if it understood more about how people were using power, when they were using it, and how they could actually be persuaded to change those patterns. I think that was an inevitable part of it. But the point which Sara makes is critical. This did not give the government or the industry any information about what people were using that power for. And so we saw a tabloid headline some years ago saying, now the government wants to put a spy in your fridge, suggesting that they will be monitoring what people had in their fridge through their smart meters. So there are scare stories out there, but the government needed to move quickly to help everybody last year. It couldn't do that without valid information. That information was there. And in so many walks of life, the government, in times of extreme circumstances, does have the power to call on information from different sources. But it didn't compromise people's privacy, as Sara was saying.
David, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. I suppose for a lot of people who might be on the fence, thinking to themselves, well, what will be the next thing that is described as an extreme circumstance? What will be the next reason given for potentially using this data? And they'll hear about stories like how data was used for the energy price guarantee, and they'll think to themselves, on the balance, I'm not totally comfortable with this.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, just to step back slightly. So the UK did something very unusual in terms of smart metering rollout, in that it insisted that the data stay on the meter in the home and only be released with the consent of the homeowner. And that, I think, was really clever in terms of making sure people stayed in control of their own data. Now, most other countries haven't done that, and most other countries do centralize their data. So that's putting that in context. I think it was a good design decision against the wishes of industry. I think it's really important to understand how little privately disclosing information you can get from this smart meter data. And as a researcher, we have tried to analyze the kind of data you get from a smart meter and work out things about what's happening in the home. And it's impossible. We can throw all the clever algorithms that we can at this data. And because it's, a half-hourly reading, there's very little you can work out. So, even if we're trying with all the resources of a university to do it, we can't kind of hack into this data and understand things. So there's not a great loss of privacy, as both Sarah and Charles were saying there. I think trust, however, is a really important element. And I think, just looping back on this, I think the two things we really need are value propositions to end consumers from industry, and for industry and government to earn and maintain the trust of consumers so that they will allow basically some level of automation of this. They can opt in and say, yes, you can pay me some money if I allow you to charge my electric vehicle overnight. Mm-hmm. And unless we have that kind of trust and value, it's going to be hard to convince customers. So, when I look at this and I think about my own personal situation, I don't see a kind of threat in terms of loss of data privacy and security. But I think it is a matter of constantly trying to engage and prove the trust that we have both with government and with industry.
We've got some great questions coming in, which I'm going to turn to now. Just a reminder to our viewers, you can submit a question in the text box just below the video. They come straight to the Spectator team and they're popping up in front of me now. So we've got a really good question here looking at smart meters in the round. And I feel like this is a very important point about other technology and how it can impact smart meters. Someone writes in and says, there are many villages around where I live that do not have phone signal, meaning they are unable to install smart meters despite residents wanting to and trying to. And this person says, I fail to see how smart meters can be that silver bullet. What do the panel think? So Sara, let's start with you. Other technology is going to impact how people can use their smart meter.
Sure. The first thing to say is that smart meters don't run off the phone network. So that isn't impacted. If there's no phone network, your smart meter isn't impacted by that. There may be some areas of the country where we're still upgrading to make sure that all smart meters can get onto the system, but get in touch with your energy supplier and get on the waiting list. The program's sort of closing in 2025 and there is some time to go, and your energy supplier will get you on that list and get a smart meter out to you. And particularly as the technology continues to develop, we're overcoming some of the barriers that we had early in the program in terms of thick walls, for example, and sometimes the signal not getting through. We're getting some new technology being rolled out this year called Alt-HAN, which will overcome some of these problems. So speak to your supplier, get on the list, but it has nothing to do with phone signal.
David, is there an inequality when it comes to smart meter rollout? Is it just going to be the case that some homes are better fit for this and that some areas are better fit for this, or is this really truly accessible to every home?
Well, it will be accessible to every home, but the way that we've rolled out smart meters is to make sure we learn the lessons from those homes which we can start more easily installing smart meters. And so the rollout has kind of gone through processes of looking at those homes where they can be relatively easily installed and then moving on to some of the ones that are more challenging. And there have been some challenges in high-rise blocks of flats, for instance, but there's been a lot of work on the technology to make sure those all work. So we will get across to virtually all homes. There might be some homes remaining that it takes a while to get through to the end of them. But the other thing to say is that we need to look at this from a kind of national picture. And once we've got about 50 to 60% of homes, I think, currently with smart metering, that enables a lot of benefits to come in terms of GB national energy security, and we need to keep moving those through the remainder of homes. But I'd throw it back to Sarah in case she has any thoughts about high-rise or other sort of difficult to install sectors.
Well, the good news is the on-hand technology that I mentioned is one of the things that hopefully we'll be getting towards the end of this year. They're in trials at the moment, and that should help with an awful lot of those.
Charles, there was an article from The Guardian in June 2022 in which smart meter users were writing in saying that they had to still have their smart meter read manually because the signal was simply not working. I mean, it does not sound like the tech is completely there around smart meters yet to make this as seamless as possible.
So this is one of the big infrastructure investment programs of the last 20, 30 years. So this is an enormous program with huge complexities to it. And that inevitably some parts of the network will be easier to reach than others. But as Sara's been and David have been making extremely clear, a huge amount of work has been going into the technology, into innovation to ensure that those issues are addressed. You're right that there are some areas which don't get the full service now, but as the rollout continues, they will get it in due course.
We have another question for the panel about a nationwide micro-renewable energy program that would look at installing solar panels, smart meters, mini wind turbines, etc. Basically asking, should all of these new technologies be focused on that smaller level and really targeting individual villages and communities to really convince them and to also have the proper balance of different technologies so that the communities can really get the most bang for their buck. Charles, let's start with you.
Well, I certainly want to see that. I want to see much greater community ownership of some of those renewable assets. I think that one of the historic mistakes in the UK has been that the main benefits have gone to the landowners and to the developers and the owners rather than to the communities. And I'd like to have seen that changed because I think that would have increased public acceptability. But we will still need large-scale generation as well. If we want to move the whole of the rail network onto electricity, if we want to ensure that we can roll out electricity for heat pumps, if we want to do it for electric vehicles and diesel trucks and things like that at the moment to move them over, then we're going to need more electricity. And then therefore doing that at a large scale, it makes sense. And if you look at where the UK has an extraordinary advantage in terms of our offshore wind capacity, then that's an area which we have invested strongly in and we need to continue doing so as the government plans. It's a mixture. So it's a mixture of large-scale investment, a lot of grid infrastructure to support that, and then more localized investment and domestic investment and the energy efficiency. It's a mixture of all of those.
Sara, what's your experience speaking to industry and consumers? Are people swayed by the decision to take up a smart meter because of some national program? Or does it happen that their neighbor has one or some local company is offering something and that's why they become interested?
Different things appeal to different people. So one of the things we do at Smart Energy GB is the national engagement program, if you like. And we see that for some consumers thinking about the benefits to the sort of environment, particularly thinking about conserving our way of life for children, grandchildren, and making sure that they're doing their bit for the environment is incredibly powerful for them. Whereas for others, it will be about the here and the now and trying to find ways in which they can save money. I did want to talk a little bit about the community energy bit that we touched on then. There are so many lovely opportunities here with smart meters to facilitate community energy. I'm aware of some trials that have happened in the last couple of years. There's a really nice one in mid Wales where essentially it looks at how you can take a village or a town where they've got local renewables, and by having a smart meter in their house, they can turn up or turn down their usage when that local renewable is available. So they can make sure that we're not losing usage through going through long cables. They can use the wind that's there right next to them and make sure that they're getting financial benefits as a result. And I think the more that people have smart meters in homes and the more that these sorts of programs and trials can come to scale, then the more opportunity for consumers. And I think it's fantastic that we can help local energy be used and made in local towns.
David, what's your experience of how you actually reach out to consumers? Governments love a national program, but sometimes the stuff is better delivered locally.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most interesting areas. And I mean, Charles is right. Basically, it's going to be a mixture of large-scale offshore wind farms, etc. But very recently, there have been studies that shown that by installing PV, for example, on rooftops and using that energy locally, that actually allows us to use more of our offshore wind, because what it does is it takes the pressure off the network. We have phrases like local for local. So if you can generate energy on your rooftop and use it locally, then you're not having to drag energy across the network great distances. And that means the network's got more capacity to bring in that power from offshore wind or large-scale solar. The other thing we've done, we've worked with a lovely company called Repowering London. They put a PV array on the rooftop of a social housing block and a battery in the basement. And then with those two technologies, they were able to cut basically the energy bills of the people in those blocks by about 20%. And so what you're doing is you're using that power where it's needed, when it's available locally. And by having a battery, you can start to take the pressure off the grid at peak times. So you can put energy in that battery when there isn't network constraints, take it out when there is. And again, that really cuts down the cost of having to upgrade all of our networks, otherwise kind of having to upgrade infrastructure and dig up roads and put in secondary power substations. So local for local is great, and it helps also with the large-scale offshore stuff.
We've had a question in that I think will sum up what a lot of consumers watching the show today will be thinking, which is how much money can a smart meter save me? Now, Sara, of course, you would have to know a lot of details about the person's situation to give any kind of specific figure to that. But let's speak more broadly here. What kind of savings are we talking about for consumers?
Sure. As I said earlier, the way in which you respond to having your smart meter in the home and how you use that information is very personal to each individual household and family. And so, it's hard for me to say what that could look like. I know the government, when they looked at this in 2019, said that they thought it was about 3% you could save on gas and 2% on electricity, or it might have been the other way around. But we do know from research that we've done that you could be looking up to 20% savings if you really go for it, if you like. So if there are things that you've been doing in your home that are wasting a lot of energy and your smart meters help you diagnose those. I know that I was talking to one smart meter installer who said that he was able to help a woman save £60 a month off her bills, because when she had that smart meter installed, they were able to see that her electricity usage was dramatically more than the profile of the homes near where she lived. And so there was something going on. And it soon transpired, her and the smart energy engineer were able to find out that what she had in her shed, which she termed her barbecue meat freezer that she had out in her shed, was so old, one of those big old chest freezers, that the rubber seal had gone, and essentially the lid therefore was open, and she was using all this energy to refrigerate her entire shed, or however, sort of the physics of all of that are working. But in essence, it was costing her a huge amount of money. And so as a result of going through this process and the diagnostics, she was able to stop using her barbecue freezer and get a new one. And I think it's not just those immediate savings that people can make. So seeing with my lights, for example, that I needed to get LEDs in instead of halogen, it's also about the feedback you get. So as you make those changes, you can see that your bill's going down, and that, we know from our research, spurs people on to do more things. And actually one of the things that has come out of our insights in terms of that behaviour change is that people who have had a smart meter are far more likely to be researching how they can buy more energy efficiency products. So, making sure that the next time they get a white good or a freezer, that they are looking for the most energy efficient version of those. So it's all about sort of giving you the information that you need to make those smart choices. And I'm sure there'll be lots of people watching this saying, do you know what, I know how to use my energy in the most effective way. I've always done it that way. I may remember the 3-day week of the 70s when homes were a lot more alive to the impact that they were having on the electricity grid and the power grid. But we know there are an awful lot of people that don't have that information, and this winter has, for good or ill, helped people understand that a little bit more and start to make those changes. Our research shows that those people who have got a smart meter have felt more in control this winter, and it's given them the information that they felt they needed to make those changes. So, as I say, in terms of what those cost changes look like, it is different for you. But if you are looking for estimates, Energy Saving Trust, which is a fantastic charity, they've done an awful lot of research to start quantifying what some of those changes are. Certainly I mentioned earlier, for example, if you go from an 8-minute shower to a 4-minute shower, you're talking about £95 a year. If you avoid using your tumble dryer, really important as we start getting to slightly drier times, you could be looking at £70 a year. So you can see how these changes can really start adding up, and they're things that don't necessarily, detract from your lifestyle, if you like. They're smart ways in which you can ensure you're not wasting energy.
Mm. Charles, that's so interesting what Sara just said about households this winter felt more in control of their situation if they had a smart meter. I mean, I personally come from the view that, data is king. But we've had somebody write in saying, perhaps slightly jokingly, I'm not sure I want my elderly relatives to have access to this data. I think the implication there, and this is a worry sometimes, is that while some people respond so well to having the data at their fingertips, it could change the behavior of some other people who perhaps, it's more dangerous if they do change their behavior. For example, turning the heating down or off at certain times when elderly folk actually really need that more.
Well, I think that's a really valid and important point, actually. I think that for this to be successful as a program, then it's got to be working for all households, and the people who are new to this and who are uncertain about it need to have access to charities like Citizens Advice or National Energy Action, who can help to guide people as to what's going to be right for them. Because at the end of the day, we don't want people to be putting themselves into a situation which is against their own well-being because they're trying to save money. Now, we know already those choices are being made. We know this winter with people who didn't have the ability to flex their use were making at times choices between, do I heat my home or do I buy food to put on the table? And so this comes at the heart of the fuel poverty issue. And this is less about technology and smart meters than about poverty. And so we need to do more to address those issues to ensure that people who are in vulnerable situations, vulnerable households, have the support which they need. But the big change which is happening is that through this technology, through the smart meters, people are going to be much more in control. Up until now, we've all been passive recipients. We haven't had any say about it. We may have had a night rate and a day rate, but that was as far as it went. We can now receive signals. We can be told, look, this is going to be a really cheap time of day to put on your tumble dryer. Or we can make choices to continue to use it, but to know that we're going to pay more. This is the first time consumers have been given that information to make choices. And that's going to be something which I think is really exciting and empowering.
David, we've had a question about requirements for new builds and basically questioning why in planning policy there aren't more requirements to bring in all of these types of renewable energy and technology to help us make cost-efficient and environmentally friendly decisions. Does this really come down to some of the discussions we've been having previous about, the consumer choice element in this, building up trust and not pushing something on someone if they don't want it?
It's an interesting question around the regulatory side on this and how we can use building regulations in particular to encourage uptake on this. But just very briefly on the previous point, we actually did a trial in fuel poor and vulnerable homes in the Tower Hamlets region in London, which was funded by Ofgem, and that was trialing smart meters. And because Ofgem were concerned about people turning down their thermostats, we installed temperature sensors in all the homes, and we were unable to see any pattern of people turning down their thermostats in response to having the smart meter data. And I think it's because they can start to understand how to use their energy better. So it's this empowering element. With respect to the building regulations, there are a lot of regulations, particularly in Europe, and I think there are regulatory changes coming in through our standard assessment procedure models that are looking at the benefits that come in from different technologies, particularly those around heat pumps. So if you introduce a heat pump into your home, you have a real benefit. And so that is now the direction the regulations are going for new build technologies. Interestingly, in Germany, they've just introduced a piece of legislation that requires that any heating system that is replaced after the end of this year has to be a low carbon one. And that's because they've been so exposed to the price fluctuations of the kind of their dependence on Russian gas. So I think that's the direction that regulations are heading. We're using that to really encourage uptake of heat pumps, not so much with PVs, because I think that depends on a wide range of other factors and the suitability of roof space, but certainly on the heat pumps, we're heading in that direction.
We are just at time, so I wanted to give each of our panelists just 1 minute to wrap up their thoughts, and please 1 minute because I don't want to go too over. So Sara, I'll start with you.
Thank you. I feel I'll summarise it to say, we are all able to help the energy security of GB, and we can do that by changing the way that we use energy and when we use energy. And getting a smart meter isn't going to be the complete answer to it, but it is one of the tools in our armoury to help us do that. And so if you want to get a smart meter, if you don't already have one, get in touch with your supplier.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I would say that smart meters is going to be central enabling technology. So the way we're going is towards greater electrification of heat and transport. Those are going to be the most cost-effective ways to operate. Prices are going to keep coming down. We've seen the US and Europe put $500 billion just recently into driving down the costs of these technologies. Without a smart meter, you won't be able to take advantage of those cost reductions. So I think it's really important that people have a smart meter in place so they can progressively take advantage of that.
Thank you. And Charles?
And to reinforce what's just been said, we're seeing a huge transfer of power now from energy companies to homes to communities. This is a real chance for them to be in control. The extent to which they choose to be in control and to use that is entirely up to them, but the access portal comes from having a smart meter. The smart meter rollout program has been slower than many of us would have wished, but we're well underway. 50% plus of British homes are now installed with smart meters. And so this is something which is going to continue. And I think as it goes further, people will see more and more benefits.
Well, thank you so much to our viewers at the office and at home for tuning in. Thank you for your excellent questions. A big thank you to Sara, David, and Charles for your wonderful contributions. Thank you so much for joining the Spectator special event. We hope to see you again soon.